Has parenting a child impacted by trauma stirred up some big feelings and challenges for you? Are you recognizing that maybe you have some unfinished business from your own history that you weren't aware of before you welcomed this child to your family? Hello, and welcome to Creating a Family, talk about adoption, foster care, and kinship care. I'm Tracy Whitney, the content director of the nonprofit organization creatingafamily.org. I'm also your host for today's interview with Dr. Robyn Koslowitz. I think you'll really appreciate today's conversation on healing your history to help your kids heal theirs. Dr. Robyn Koslowitz is a licensed clinical psychologist and the founder of the Center for Psychological Growth of New Jersey. She is also a keynote speaker and internationally recognized school consultant, helping schools become trauma-informed and integrate social and emotional learning into their curricula. She is also the author of a brand new book called Post-Traumatic Parenting: Break the Cycle and Become the Parent You Always Wanted to Be. Here it is. And we just want to say welcome and thanks for joining us, Dr. Koslowitz.
Thanks so much for having me. This is such a great organization to speak with because I feel like you're already trauma informed, which I think is the biggest hump.
Yeah, well, we do try. It's a lot to learn. And we feel like as a team, we're always learning. And that's part of the reason we get so excited about bringing new information to our audience. So I think this book is going to be of great appeal to those that we're supporting and serving in the adoptive, foster, and kinship space.
Yeah.
You open the book by saying, quote, "It's not you, it's your trauma." That feels, when I read it, kind of like a relief, but also kind of like a challenge. Can you unpack that for the parents and caregivers who may tend to blame themselves for every misstep in their parenting?
Yes, so much, right? Like it feels like when you're parenting, for every parent, it's like something happens and you react. And then later on in the dead of the night, maybe you're thinking like, why did I yell so loud? Why did I get that mad? Why did I turn away when my kid was really being stressful instead of leaning in? And we feel so bad about ourselves. Like, who could yell at a 4-year-old, right? Like what, like she's 14. I get that, 14 is challenging, but at the same token, like she's a kid. How did I get that frustrated? And later on, upon mature reflection, we feel so bad, but we learned that somewhere. Right? It's not like you became a parent and suddenly you started yelling and you've never yelled before in your life. That's not how it happens. At some point in your life, you learned whatever that pattern was. And I'm going to call that instance of learning trauma, right? So you didn't just wake up one morning and say, hey, I want to get really stressed out with my kids, or hey, I want to space out, ignore my kids, just zone out on my phone and just completely check out today. Like that never happened. No parent wakes up in the morning and says, I want to do this poorly, right? When we do it poorly, which we do, because sometimes we're more skillful, sometimes we're less, sometimes we're more overwhelmed, sometimes we're less, usually there's a trauma backstory that taught you that coping pattern. And I think you're right. It's a little scary because it's like, wait, if I've been rehearsing this pattern for so long, how do I unrehearse it? But then there's that other side of you're not the worst person in the world who just decided to yell at a 10-year-old, right? That's not the thing, because that's the thing I hear the most from parents is the yelling, right? Parents really say, I was much harsher than I intended to be. I got much angrier than I intended to be. I got much meaner or more aggressive than I intended to be. That seems to be the prevailing, problem that parents come into my office with. And it's always, well, where did you learn that? Because you just didn't wake up one morning and start doing that. That came from somewhere.
So in the book, you call that post-traumatic parenting. But I'm wondering, how does that different from saying a parent with trauma or an unhealed parent?
So not necessarily is it different.
Okay.
I think we're carrying different legacies and different burdens when we're talking about unhealed, when someone, for example, has an unexamined like mental illness, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when someone has, or when someone has a behavioral health challenge, right? Someone has a diagnosis like depression, somebody has a diagnosis like OCD, and maybe in their whole life, they were able to manage around that condition, right? And that's fine. They were able to, really rest when their mood got too big for them to handle. They were able to make accommodations around their OCD, and that worked well until they were parenting. Right. And when you're parenting, I happen to treat a lot of, young parents with OCD. When you're parenting, you can't spend 3 hours getting dressed because the skirts, every skirt in your closet needs to be symmetrically hung up before you can put any clothing on, right? For example, or, something feels germy, so you can't put it on. When you're a
Mm-hmm.
single person, you can figure out a job where, yeah, I can come 3 hours late and that's fine. That works. You can't do that with a 3-year-old, right? So in some ways, it's not that different. Parenting is very often the first time that we take the aspects of ourselves that are unhealed and we say, wait, I've got to get a handle on this.
Mm-hmm.
Trauma, though, in particular, teaches us certain lessons about ourselves and the world. And it very often takes us over, and it very often makes us think that this is the only way to cope. Very often when you have something like OCD, you have OCD. You just think like, this is me. I have my quirks, right? With PTSD, very often, and with trauma in general, very often, you just think this is the world. This is how the world is. You don't think, oh, maybe there's something about my response that could be different. Maybe I don't have to get that anxious.
Right.
Maybe this is not that dangerous. Maybe if I held on to my anger and didn't lash out with it, nothing terrible would happen. I wouldn't explode. Like I wouldn't die. Like nothing would happen. But you don't think that way because your
Right.
trauma has taught you for so many years to be and to cope and to adapt in the way that you adapt. So there's a little bit of a difference in terms of often people do realize when they have a condition, it's just parenting that makes them say, oh, I've actually got to get a handle on this
Right.
versus trauma, which sometimes you don't even realize until your children sort of reveal it, which is cool.
And if you're parenting children who have their own histories of trauma that have not been addressed or not been identified, that escalates both experiences of trauma and how each person is manifesting that trauma. And
Right,
then we have to be the adults in the room and say, okay, somebody's got to deal with this and somebody has to get this healed. And
right,
that's us.
exactly. Right. And unfortunately, right, that does fall on the adult, but also
Yeah.
fortunately, because one thing I say in the book is it's not that our kids trigger us, it's that our
Right.
kids reveal our triggers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in some ways, there's this huge advantage to parenting with a history of trauma because our kids are going to reveal our triggers and then we can actually do something about our triggers.
Yeah.
And you're right that when a child has their own trauma history, everything becomes a little bit accelerated because they're not experiencing the world the way the most neurotypical child with like what I would call like a psychotypical profile has.
Mm-hmm.
They're not making the same assumptions about the world that everybody else might. Like new people are friendly and are going to be nice to you, and adults are there to help you, right? These are
Right.
assumptions about the world that we sometimes think that all children have. But children who've grown up in adversity don't have those. So then everything that we might imagine would go smoothly doesn't, like the first day of school or a friend's birthday party or, a bad mark on a test, right?
Right.
Which, in any other situation, you would expect the child to say, oh, I don't understand this question on the test. I will raise my hand and ask the teacher. A child with a trauma history might be like, I don't want the teacher to know that I'm struggling.
Right.
And if you have a trauma history, then that might become disproportionately large,
Right.
right? And
Right.
that's where the real interesting work happens.
So that brings up the issue of kind of that internal guilt that when we become aware of it and we say, oh yeah, this is something that is an opportunity for healing, but it can also make us feel like, oh, how can I give this child what they need when it's not something I myself ever received? How do you help parents and caregivers move from that maybe sense of guilt or that sense of lack without glossing over their pain?
Yeah. And that's a huge question. I don't want to sound glib with the answer. This is something this is something I do all the time. It's something I've lived. So that awful feeling of my kids are going to be damaged by my damage is a really scary sensation to have. A lot of us with trauma histories walk around feeling defective. We feel like, we're that broken toy in the bin that's 50% off, like there's something wrong.
Right.
And then we parent, and it's like, oh no, I have this child entrusted to me, and I cannot let this child be damaged by my damage. But then at the same token, when we realize that in some ways our damage becomes our superpower, right? That very thing that we look at as this makes me defective is also something that we can use and we can really sort of exploit in a good way to parent our kids. For example, even just the idea that parenting is super valuable and there's never anything more valuable that a child can receive, right? That it is such a gift that is not something to take for granted, right? Something like dinner on the table and coming home to the smell of food cooking and a parent who's ready to do your homework with you and a home that's cleared for and clean. These are gifts and something to appreciate, right? You might feel defective because you didn't experience it, so you had to learn how to do it and it was hard. But now you've learned how to do it and you can give that gift to another child.
Yeah.
That's huge. And your inner child can actually experience the experience of nurturing from the standpoint of the nurturer, but can tune into it. So in the book, I talk about what it was like for me. I was raised with a very ill parent. My father had a very serious heart condition, and some of my trauma has to do with that story. But when I got married, my husband was a young, healthy dad, and he knew how to like play with my kids, and he knew how to, just like roughhouse and just do kind of what dads do, right? Just play around. And I was this very like sort of organized, task focused. Some of it had to do with being a graduate student and working and having small children, but very organized, very like task focused. And I would get irrationally angry when my husband would come home and start like roughhousing with the kids too close to bedtime, until I realized that this was my inner child feeling really jealous of my real world children because they were experiencing something, right? This experience of playing with a parent, not growing up in a hospital, right? But like playing with a parent that I never had, that joy of just like dad throws you up into the air and you're giggling, right? That I had just never experienced. But at some point I was able to look at that and say, I can join in the play and my inner child can experience it from the standpoint of the adult who's playing, but I can play too, right? And that was such a profoundly healing moment for me, right? Because my inner child just got something.
Yeah, repeatedly in the book, you talk about the act of parenting can heal where your parenting was not adequate in your own history. I love that. That's kind of the recurring theme that you talk about. In that vein, it sounds to me like there's a lot of reframing that you do with parents and caregivers to help them see through a different lens that the inadequacies or the traumas that they experienced from their own family of origin can be opportunities for not just their own healing, but then to help the children in our demographic who've been adopted or fostered or come through relative caregiving experience their own healing. Is that a kind of a good summary of that?
Yeah, it's an excellent summary of that. And I think that I also want to point out that very often when people had traumas in their childhood, it doesn't necessarily mean that their parents were abusive or neglectful or in some way bad, right? A lot of people will, I had someone say to me, like, I bought your book, but I can't, my mom comes to my house a lot. I don't want her to see it because I don't want her to realize that I look at my childhood as traumatic, right? Which I think at some point, clarity and communication is a very good thing to do, but that's a separate conversation. But sometimes your parents did the best they could with the tools they had, right? My father certainly did not intend to be ill, right? I grew up in a home that was very dedicated to keeping him alive. He had many hard episodes as I was growing up, and they were very scary. My parents did the best they could with the tools they had. Sometimes there are no adequate tools for certain life situations, right? Sometimes parents are immigrants. Sometimes parents are dealing with poverty. Sometimes parents are dealing with, really stressful life situations, a business that's on the verge of collapse, an older sibling with a really serious disease, right? Things that just aren't in the control of parents. And sometimes parents are doing the best they can with the advice they're given, and the advice is poor. You know,
Right.
I've worked with people who were bullied, whose parents were told, ignore it, let the children work it out on their own, with the advice being very well-meaning, but there's a difference between good-natured teasing and a
Right.
campaign of harassment and bullying, right?
Right.
Or a parent who puts their child into a certain form of treatment. There's certainly, a lot of, adult survivors of like the troubled teen industry who are talking now about what they went through in certain like
Right.
rehab facilities where
Right.
the parents were terrified for their children, were told this is the best treatment for your child. um, it landed traumatic,
Yeah.
right? We
Yep.
can't necessarily, so to speak,
Yeah.
blame the parents. When we look at someone, we say your childhood was traumatic. It's very easy to sort of blame the parents. This
Right.
isn't about blame. Like my book is very much not about that. My book is very much about trauma happened. It was an instance of learning. It affected you in some way. That doesn't mean that the trauma was inflicted intentionally,
Right.
right?
Right.
And I want to give people that permission because like that person who told me my mom can't ever see I read your book, we're not indicting your mom. Your
Right.
childhood was
Right.
traumatic. That's not an indictment of your mom, right?
Yeah.
Two things are true.
That's an excellent point. I love that. I've actually said to my adult children, I did the best I could with what I had, and I'm sorry if it hurt you. And there's been times in this journey of learning how to be trauma informed, I've had to go back to my adult children and say, I did this incorrectly, or I did this badly, or I did this, in a way that caused harm, and please forgive me for that. But now that
Right.
I know better, I'm going to do better.
But I love that you proactively did that. You didn't just say, "Ooh, I didn't do that. I hope they don't remember." You went back to them and you repaired.
Yeah.
Because it's never too late to repair, even with our adult kids. Like we sometimes look at child development or, human development as though it ends at age 18. But our relationships with our children are constantly evolving. I have adult children now, and
Yep.
we've had conversations about their childhood. I'm a child psychologist. I didn't do everything right.
Yep.
And the ability to repair and to say, that was wrong. That landed the way I didn't intend. That was a mistake. I'm sorry. How do we fix it now? What
Yep.
can I do now to make that up to you? How do we talk about it differently? What have we learned from it? That's such a superpower. I think a lot of post-traumatic people don't realize that that's a superpower. Like when you've experienced a lot of trauma in your childhood, and for any parent here who's raising a traumatized child, very often people who experience a lot of really intense trauma early on don't really know about the possibility of repair. They think that
Mhm.
anything that goes wrong is wrong and it's over. And there's nothing you can ever do about it. And that's like something that we have to really explode. And we have
Yeah.
to say, okay, so how do we fix it? Yeah, we messed up.
Yeah.
I messed up. You messed up. This was a messed up situation.
Yeah.
How do we fix it? Because we always can.
That's so hopeful. I appreciate the encouragement that brings. I am sorry to interrupt this conversation. I'm finding it fascinating to consider how to reframe trauma into an opportunity for healing, and I hope you are as well. But I wanted to make you aware of another tool that we have here at Creating a Family that can help you reframe your parenting and strengthen your skills to help your family find the healing that they need, especially if you've got children who've experienced trauma. And that is our library of 15 free courses, thanks to our partnership with the Jockey Being Family Foundation. You can go to bit.ly/JBF support. That's bit.ly/JBF support. And there's 15 free courses there that you can use to build up your toolbox for parenting and strengthen your family. And we're grateful to the Jockey Being Family Foundation for those courses. Thank you. You talk in the book about 5 post-traumatic parenting defaults. Can you explain what those are and then what they might look like in real life moments of parenting so that people can kind of start to put kind of hands on what we're talking about today?
Sure. So the defaults really came out of teaching so many post-traumatic parenting classes and over the years, hearing questions and realizing that people tend to default into certain categories.
Mm.
So the first post-traumatic parent type is the perfectionist post-traumatic parent. And this is the person who says, I am going to do everything right. Like my childhood was terrible. My kids are not going to experience anything wrong. I am going to be the perfect parent. And they're working so hard on parenting perfectly, they forget to parent and be present. And they forget that there's no such thing as perfect parenting. It's a bad idea, right? Winnicott said even the beneficial is toxic in the excess, right? Perfect would be a bad thing for kids.
Yep.
So there's that parent. Then we have the disengaged post-traumatic parent, which is somebody who feels so damaged by their damage that they disengage from their children. So that might be someone who outsources their parenting, like they let their parenting partner do a lot of it. Sometimes that's somebody who disengages in the form of like, you know, dissociating, being very like mindless, being on their phone all the time, sort of, you know, taking a step back. Like my kids are going to be stressful. I'll zone out on my phone, let them sort it out. I'm just not going to deal with it because I got to take the edge off because my edges are so sharp. Sometimes that's a little bit of like, you know, mommy wine culture. I hate to gender it, but like you hear that type of thing a lot. But parents who just take a step back. I was a disengaged parent. For me, it was very much being a workaholic. And my husband, I felt like was the undamaged one who had the normal childhood. So I used to let him do a lot of the play and a lot of that kind of parenting stuff. Then we have the entangled parent. Entangled parents are ones who are so caught up in some sort of a drama that they can't quite get to their kids. Maybe it's family of origin drama. Maybe it's a toxic workplace. Maybe it's a frenemy. Maybe it's an ex-spouse, but they're so caught up in something else. I always picture like a fish that's tangled up in a net and their kids are over there and they can't quite swim forward.
Oh, that's a great picture for it. Yeah.
Yeah. And you see it a lot with people who are just like in a real custody dispute, in a real family of origin, expects them to drop everything for the family of origin and they just can't parent. Everything's sort of an emergency. Then we have the paralyzed parent. And this is somebody who feels so lacking in discernment. They just don't know how to make a decision. So they're frantically busy, which is not what you usually think of as paralysis, but they're not doing anything effective. So they might be intervening with one child and then something's burning on the stove and then they start cleaning up one room and then, you know, they get a phone call about something else and they're just rushing from thing to thing, but they're never committing to one course of action at a time. And they really need to learn to trust a level of discernment. Like tonight, dinner is going to be peanut butter and jelly. My kid is crying. I'm focusing on that, right? And really making that decision. And then there are parents who are in survivor mode, which is not even really a default. It's just what happens, sort of like if you look at PTSD, right, as the condition that sets in after trauma. There's a condition called acute stress disorder, ASD, which is sort of right when the trauma is happening. Someone's dying in the hospital right now. My house just burned down. I just got fired, right? Like huge traumatic experiences. And they're operating on the adrenaline of shock, but the damage hasn't yet set in.
Okay.
So people can be in survivor mode for years and years and years and just one day sort of wake up and be like, how did this happen? I had somebody like very dramatically in the post-traumatic parenting class say that she was talking about how she's waking up from survivor mode. Like 4 years ago, I was living in another state with a job and a spouse and like this was my life. And then COVID happened. My business fell apart. My marriage unraveled. I'm living back at home with my parents and my kids are 4 years older. And I just woke up and I was like, wait, what just happened? And it's like, wow, yeah, you're waking up from survivor mode. And it's suddenly hitting you that your children's childhood is passing as this is happening. You need to start parenting again.
Right.
Makes perfect sense, right?
So when you're in a moment where your default is being activated, how can you start to spot some of that for yourself?
So it's really helpful to sort of hear about the defaults and then say, oh, that's totally me. And a lot of parents have one of two, right? I was somewhat entangled, somewhat disengaged. So between those two things, I was entangled in my family of origin, which happens very often when there's a severe illness in a family. And I was also the only daughter, and daughters very often take on caregiving roles. And then also, you know, that disengagement of, as a child, I had learned to be very dissociated and focused on my work. So that was just my coping pattern. So I just learned how to do that. You know, as a parent, I just thought that's the world, which is what happens with our trauma defaults. We don't even think like, oh, this is a trauma default. We think this is the way it has to be.
Right.
So when you start realizing, oh, it's not the way it has to be. Like when someone asks you a crucial question, like, so what happens if you do make a mistake with your kids? And the thought is so intolerable, like, no, I can't. That can't happen.
Right.
Then you say, oh, other people are not afraid of making a mistake with their kids? Or like other people don't need to dissociate in order to get through a stressful evening with their children? or, other people tell their family of origin or their toxic best friend, sounds like you have a crisis, but I'm with my kids right now, so I'll speak to you tomorrow. Like other
Yeah.
people are free to do that. It's almost shocking. It's like, oh, wait, you can do that?
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah. um, I love this part of the book because you stop and talk very specifically about the steps parents and caregivers can take when they feel those trauma defaults, those unhealthy patterns starting to emerge. You offer like 5 or 6 steps that parents can take. Would you walk us through kind of those steps?
Yeah, so I look at trauma as an app in your brain, as opposed to seeing trauma as a past wound, which is how people conceptualize it. And they're like, oh, I had this wound happen to me. I should be over it by now. I should be healed. The way you break your leg, 2 years later, you expect maybe an occasional ache in the bone, but on the whole, you expect it to be fully strong and healed, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We look at trauma that way, but trauma actually installs an app in our brain. And that app very often overrides what we would like to do. And when you look at trauma as an app, you understand that it's not about a past event. It's about current programming. So the idea is to look at it exactly like you would an app on your phone and be like, I want to deselect these permissions.
This is so mind-blowing to me. When I was looking it over and reading it, I was like, that app metaphor is so perfect for when we do understand what trauma is and what it does to a developing brain for our kids, but then we don't often apply that same mindset to ourselves. So I'm very excited that
Right.
you're explaining the metaphor and that you're going through the 4 steps of how to address it.
I love that you love the metaphor, because for me, when I thought of the metaphor, it changed everything in terms of my own frustration with myself,
Mm-hmm.
because I still sometimes say, like, why am I still so hyper vigilant about things like health? Like, I should be over that by now. Like, no, it's an app. You got scary news and the app turned itself back on. It reasserted its
Right.
permissions. That makes so much sense. It's part of your programming now, right? I always say PTSD is not how my brain dysfunctions, even though the D is disorder. PTSD is how my brain functions at this point. So I have to understand it really well, because I have to sort of become a good user of my app. It's there, it's
Yep.
installed, I've got to use it, right? It has some good points to it, it has some poor points to it. I need to be able to say, oh, that's what's going
Yeah.
on here. But that's what I want parents to do. So if, for example, you are that paralyzed parent, right? And you're, oh, should I be making dinner, or should I be talking to my kid? My teenager stomped upstairs. I went to their room. Should I give her space, or should I go up? And then you're like indecisively doing 30 things at once,
Right.
and saying to your app, wait, I've got this. I'm going to pick one course of action. It might be wrong. And that's okay. You're screaming an alarm at me. Might be the wrong action. That's okay. It's better to do one wrong action, right? Better to like stay downstairs and focus on dinner and not go up to the teenager, even if going up to the teenager would have been the smarter thing in retrospect,
Mm-hmm.
than to half make dinner while calling to the teenager to come down and therefore accomplishing neither. Or I'm
Right.
going to decide to go up to the teenager, and maybe that's not the best thing. Maybe they need to blow off steam in their room and I'll talk to them later. That would be okay too. But I've got to
Yeah.
pick a course of action. Trauma
Yeah.
app, I need you to stop yelling the alarms. I'm muting your alarms right now. I picked a course of action. I'm what we call pick and stick. I picked, and I'm sticking to it. And that's that. And even if
Yeah.
somebody's going to criticize me later,
Right.
right? You were chopping onions while your kid was crying in your bedroom. Yeah, I was, because I wanted to give her space. And maybe that was a great choice.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes that was a great choice. Actually, when I talk to paralyzed parents, I'm sometimes like, no, you made a good choice there. You focus on the kid who was crying, and you let the other kid who was loud but not actually in need of your empathy right now sort of like be mad for a while. That was okay, because you can't be in two places at once. Even if your trauma app has such faith in you and thinks you can't.
Yeah.
And that's
So
okay.
pause and pick a course of action.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
great.
And
I
then
love that.
each post-traumatic parenting subtype, we sort of say, okay, this is what your trauma app wants you to do.
Mm-hmm.
And now tell it, thanks, appreciate the help. Good idea, but I've got a better idea. So I'm going to do mine, and I'm going to override your signals, right? As long as later on you look at those signals and you say, you were giving me valuable information. What do I want to do with it now?
That's fantastic. So, can you talk a little bit about when we're doing all of that? How do we kind of identify the triggers that we're feeling in the moment?
Okay. So for me, the key thing is I look for disproportionality. So when a parent says, I yelled much louder than I should, or it's been 3 days and I haven't talked to my kid, like I've basically been giving her the silent treatment, not because I'm trying to give her the silent treatment as a punishment, but because I don't know what to say. I'm scared I'll yell. So I'm just not talking to her. And she's probably interpreting that as the silent treatment. You know, this was too big a reaction.
Okay.
Then that tells me, that's like sort of my clue of, there's a trigger here. Because it's not that your reaction was wrong, right?
Right.
If your 4-year-old, this may or may not have happened in my home this morning, if your 4-year-old takes off their shoes for the fourth time when we're trying to like get somewhere because like mom has a day of work and we have to get you somewhere, that can get you angry. Like anger identifies a problem. That's a problem, right? If you got so angry that you yelled and that's not consistent with your parenting values, that's disproportionate, right? Your reaction was a 10 when it should have been a 2, right? It should have been a, like, we're putting on our shoes now. If we're not going to put on our shoes, I guess I'm just going to put you in the car in your Crocs. Like, okay. And that's what you're going to wear, I guess. Right. Right. You can have a level 2 reaction to a level 2 stressor. When you're having a level 10 reaction to a level 2 stressor, that's the thing that tells me, oh, something else is going on here. So like if your kid is going to be late to school and you're so stressed out about that, why? Why is that so scary? Kids are late to school sometimes. Not great. It's not ideal. Teacher doesn't love it. It's not great for their learning, but it's not the end of the world. So why are you so stressed out? Well, the teacher might judge me. Okay. And if the teacher judges you, what might happen? And then we're going to hear a story. And that story was likely an instance of trauma. Because if you look at trauma as simply an experience that was too big for your brain to metabolize, something that made you feel alone in the world, something that made you feel like the world is unsafe and you can't survive within it, you don't know your place within it, then whatever that story was, maybe you were judged by your teacher when you were a kid. Maybe you were harshly criticized by a parent, right? Something made you think that this is the worst thing in the world, as opposed to just like, yeah, you're going to be late to school, or like, yeah, you know, your day's not going to go as planned, or, you know, whatever the instance was. If the stress was too big, if it was disproportionate, something's going on there. There's a reason for that. So that's what I say what I mean when I say our kids don't trigger us, our kids reveal our triggers. Yeah. Because now I know your trigger, right? And we got to reveal it to heal it. So this is great news.
Reveal it to heal it. I love that. That's great. Is that kind of what you meant in the book when you were talking about the check-in rituals?
Yeah, because you want to be checking in. Well, you want to be checking in with yourself, with your inner child, with your trauma app, and constantly saying, why is this such a big deal? Or why is this so scary? Or why is this intolerable? Like, what is it about this? And very often you're going to find out, right? But then you also want to be checking in with your trauma app, because your trauma app tells the truth. It just exaggerates a lot, right? So there's a kernel of truth there. So what do you want to do with it? For example, let's say, you know, for me, health can be scary, right? So let's say a doctor finds something and they say, oh, I want to biopsy this, figure out what's going on. That is indeed scary. Now, until we get the results of that biopsy, there's not much I can do about it, right? But my trauma app is going to keep me up every night, all night, like thinking of all the worst case scenarios that everything could possibly be, and like planning the eulogy my kids are going to give at my funeral, right? Like my trauma app is like creative. It's ready to do all of those things. To be able to say to that trauma app, thank you, this is indeed true. If this is indeed something scary, we will have to deal with it. But guess what? Not much I can do right now. I have 2 weeks to wait. Can't do much about it, right? And that's very glib, right? Because it's still going to keep keeping you up. But if you keep deselecting that permission, can't be hypervigilant. I can't worry about this right now. Good information. Thank you, trauma app. Appreciate it. Not so much I can do about it. Right. Very often we can then come to like a much healthier place of coping or dealing. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And then we can ask ourselves, like, what do I need right now to help silence that voice and keep the deselected? Do I need to go for a walk? Do I need to journal? Do I need to, practice yoga or go do Pilates or in my case, crochet.
Right.
Do I need to
Right.
do something
Whatever.
else that will silence that and keep it silenced until I decide that I need to turn it back on?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's another big pillar of the book, this idea that self-care is childcare,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I cannot bring my whole self to parenting if I don't have a self.
Yeah.
And some of that means that, sure, I remember like when I was a very young mom and I would want to go out and do something, and it was something like not absolutely necessary. Go to the gym,
Yeah.
go to a friend, go to,
Right.
go to a party. And, you go through that like only mommy phase that like toddlers do, where you're the preferred parent and you feel so bad. Like, forget it. I don't need to go out with my friends tonight. It's fine. I'll stay home. He's so upset.
Right.
Where
Right.
like, no, self-care is childcare. If I go out with my friend, I will be more myself when I come home. Daddy is a very capable parent.
Mm-hmm.
The kid will be distressed, but it's a normative distress and repair is possible,
Right.
right? It's
Right.
okay. Just even those kinds of things. I think we sometimes, nowadays especially, there's a lot of rhetoric about that where, we understand attachment better and we understand how important it is, but we sometimes give it magical powers or mythologize it, give it this mythic status of like everything will disrupt attachment. No,
Right.
sometimes like good quality, daycare or good quality, someone else watching your kid
Right.
or, a break from the children that isn't strictly necessary. You're not like, at death's door, you're just going out with friends. Sometimes that actually makes you a better parent and it enhances attachment.
Yeah.
But if you listen to certain
Yeah.
influencers online, you would think that if we're not all living on farms and baby wearing till our kids are 4 and, growing their wheat with our own hands to make our sourdough pancakes for them,
Yeah.
then we're
Yeah.
harming attachment irreparably. And, best we can do is pay for their therapy.
Yeah, and I'm an old mom, very old mom, so I watch those and I just think, "Oh, honey, you are gonna wear yourself out before they get to kindergarten." And
Yeah.
it's exhausting to feel like you have to be that on all the time because attachment is primary and it is foundational, but it's not the only thing that matters in parenting our children well, especially when we're parenting children who've got extensive histories of trauma or neglect or complex issues of, the impacts from prenatal substance exposure. This kind of parenting that we're doing kind of is like parenting up a notch or parenting on steroids. And if we're not supplying and fueling ourselves well,
Yeah.
the attachment is not going to be whole and healthy on both sides of the equation. And that's the thing. Attachment is a two-way street.
Right.
It's not just a one-way thing.
It's also, if you look at like Edtronic's work, you understand that attachment is a dance. And in a
Mm-hmm.
dance, there are steps forward and step backwards, right?
Yep.
There are pauses, right? There are moments where you change direction. It would not be a very interesting dance if you just were walking in one direction the whole time. That would be a
Right.
march, and that's not fun to watch, right? In fact,
Right.
that's somewhat menacing, right? It's
Yeah.
not great.
Yep.
Attachment is meant to be this dance, this back and forth, and which might mean we drop off at daycare and there's some tears, and then we pick up and there's repair.
Yes.
Right. And
Yes.
that's such a beautiful thing, right? Think of like I love the picture book, like Llama Llama, Mrs. Mama, right? Mama comes back at the end of the
Yeah.
day, right? It's very
Yep. Yep.
sad. Mama's not there. And that's we had that
Mhm.
experience. We've experienced that with both as kids and as adults, but mama comes back, right? And sometimes we have to
Yep.
teach kids that mama comes back, but mama can only come back if mama leaves,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Not in a bad way. Obviously, we're talking about high quality daycare or a high quality kindergarten, a high
Right.
quality babysitter, right?
Yep.
There's other considerations to take into place, but like when you look at some of what people say, it really does sound like, attachment is this fragile, like precious thing that
Right.
attachment is precious, but it's not fragile, right? And in fact, it gets stronger with all these minor ruptures and repairs.
Right.
But if you're post-traumatic yourself, you're going to awfulize that. It
Right.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Catastrophizing is something that those of us who
Yeah.
maybe tend towards perfectionism do quite
yeah.
well.
Yeah.
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 So, in your chapter on becoming the parent you want to be, you discuss cycle breaking versus cycle making. And I really appreciated that section of how to kind of integrate everything that we're learning and then actually apply it to our parenting in healthy new cycle. So could you talk a little bit about what that is, why cycle making versus cycle breaking is such a valuable tool for the kind of long-term parenting patterns that we want to establish?
Yeah, I think you're pointing to something so important in the book because, after the book came out, this new research came out that the newest form of parenting that people are embracing is cycle breaking parenting. And I think as I've been thinking about it, because my thinking has evolved, that idea of like the pendulum, like that switches from like side to side, right? And so I feel like gentle parenting was sort of the pendulum shift away from the harsher, more authoritarian parenting that we used to have in the past, but it was about breaking a cycle. When you think about cycle breaking, it's really about understanding that it's not that hard to break a cycle, right? You just stop doing something. But that's really not enough, right?
Still leaves a gap.
Still leaves a gap,
Yeah.
right? You know what not to do. So I'm going to
Right.
not hit my
Right.
kid. That's great. Wow, that's really hard. If your whole life you were hit and you were told, spare the rod, spoil the child, this is the best way to parent, it's a gift, it's the best thing, and you were only modeled that approach to handling your anger. So
Right.
not spanking is fabulous. Like you are working so hard
Right.
because not doing something that your brain defaults to is so hard.
Right.
But what are
right.
you yes doing? Right? Your kid still needs to be taught something. Your kid still needs to be redirected. Your anger needs to be handled, right? There has to be a way of dealing with it. On the post-traumatic parenting podcast, I had somebody who we were talking about this idea about how it's never too late to repair. And she was saying how her own mom used to give her the silent treatment her whole life. And this was a psychologist herself who researches families. And she said her mom used to give her the silent treatment and it really bothered her. And that's why she became a communications researcher and she was into like communications and families. And we were talking about that. And I was saying about how it's never too late to repair. And she said, I think I'm going to have this conversation with my mom about like, why did she give me the silent treatment? It was so painful for me. So she sat down with her mom, who was elderly, and they had this conversation. And as a psychologist, she knew how to like broach it in a very gentle, like this was meant to be a repairing because they still had a strong relationship. And her mom told her, it was a point of pride with me. I never laid my hands on you. No matter how mad I get, I might have gone away for like a week, but I never hit you.
Yeah.
And she said, wow, she was trying to break a cycle.
Yeah.
I never realized. To me, it was like, why does she silent treatment me? This is so painful. How could a mother who loves her child do this to her kid?
Yeah.
I tried so hard to be good so that she wouldn't give me the silent treatment. It was so painful for me. And then she would just like disappear into one of her moods for a few days. And it felt like such a, almost emotional blackmail that I had to not trigger her moods. But she was trying not to hit me. Wow. And it was such a profound moment of repair for her, right? She is cycle making. Right. As a post-traumatic parent, she is working on like, how do I communicate with my kids through stressful moments? Right. Because she is taking it that one step further.
Right.
So yes, cycle breaking is super important, but sometimes cycle breaking does, like you said, leave a void and leave a gap.
Yeah.
So cycle making is, but what do I want to do instead? Because it is so hard to have a to-don't list and a to-do list when you're parenting. Right?
Yep.
Your to-do list is enough. Your to-do list, it grows and grows and grows and grows and grows.
Right.
But if you're also juggling a giant to-don't list, that's really hard. We also know from acceptance and commitment therapy that the way our brains work is that when we focus a lot on what we don't want to do, we end up doing it more. Right? If you think don't yell, you end up yelling. If you think when I feel stressed, I'm going to sing, you will do that. Yeah. Right? But we have a to-don't list because we feel damaged by our damage. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So it's kind of flipping that from focusing all of our energy on the to-don't, which is not, as you said, the worst thing in the world, but then taking it that step farther and saying, and here's what I'm going to do instead. And choosing something positive and healthy and focusing your time and energy on that. It goes back to that conversation. What you focus on is what you will become. And, we teach that to our kids. Like if you surround yourself by positive, healthy endeavors, then you are much more likely to become positive and healthy yourself. And kind of giving ourselves that permission to do the same thing and the grace to do that same thing.
Yeah.
One more quick interruption and to tell you about a couple additional ways to help you keep learning and keep building your parenting toolbox. First, we think you should check out our free monthly newsletter, which you can find at creatingafamily.org/newsletter. And when you get there, you can choose a free downloadable guide that's full of practical tools that will strengthen your family. You can pick from one called Parenting a Child Exposed to Trauma. There's another one called Navigating Challenging Behaviors. You can pick one of the four as a free gift from Creating a Family. Second, you can like, follow, or subscribe to this podcast, and that way you'll never miss anything new that we put out in terms of interviews or weekend wisdom, all of which are designed to strengthen your family. So between those two actions, you're never going to miss what's going on here at Creating a Family and what new resources and tools we bring you every week. And the monthly newsletter kind of summarizes all of that for you. Thanks so much. I would love to jump kind of into some very practical real life experience that we can give to the parents and caregivers that are listening today, whatever that looks like in your language, or how you advise parents, say kind of, what do you want parents to do when they come away from this conversation? What are the to-dos that you want them to fill their minds and fill their lists with?
So that's the entire third section of the book is sort of the how to parent section, where what I did was myself, I felt so damaged, right? And I felt like my poor kids that they have me for a parent. And thankfully, as somebody who was doing research on child development and as, somebody in school to be a child psychologist, because of course, all research is me-search, right? We're always trying to figure out what we don't know about the world, right? It's not like an accident that in the, 90s, every doctoral dissertation in psychology was about divorce because the children of divorce were growing up and becoming grad students, right? It keeps happening. It's not an accident that after 9/11, there were a lot of dissertations about trauma, right? For me, I realized that my whole journey to become a child psychologist was this one question of what is the impact of trauma on parenting? And of course, if you're on social media, there's so many parenting trends and so many people who will tell you, if you don't follow my approach, then you're screwing your kids up forever, right? Like that's it. You're done. But really, parenting boils down to what I call R2, which is being responsive and responsible, which comes from Diana Bauman's research on the four parenting types, authoritarian, authoritative, neglectful, permissive, right? This idea that what you want to be on the one hand is the gentle parenting folks have a good point. We want to be child development focused. We want to be neurodevelopment focused. We want to be attachment focused. We want to understand about big emotions in little bodies. We want to understand how kids' brains make sense of the world. And we want to start and lead with that empathy, right? Of really understanding them and talking to them. Then there's the other side of being responsible, teaching them skills, right? Holding them to a standard of behavior. Right? Imparting our values to them. The one does not have to cancel out the other. But if you look at social media, it almost feels like you have to pick one or the other. There are, I always use this example because it drives me crazy. There are corners of the internet where people will say things like sticker charts are abusive and they harm attachment and they're coercive. And to me, it's oh, so you're a post-traumatic parent who felt coerced growing up, or you were coming out of a coercive relationship. Sticker charts, managed well, are a tool that you can use in a responsive and responsible fashion, right? And in the book, I have a whole acronym of how to use them. And it's the same thing with communicating disagreement with a child's behavior to them. There are corners of the internet where if you say to a child, that was a rude thing to say, you're harming attachment, right? As opposed to saying get that you were very disappointed with the gift that grandma gave you. And I really get that when you were so excited and you thought she was going to give you a gift that you liked, and then you got this gift that was disappointing. I get why you said that. And let's put ourselves in grandma's shoes for a second. How do you think she felt? Right? That does not harm attachment. That makes it actually what happens then is the child is they themselves have a sense ooh, that look on grandma's face. Ooh, maybe I didn't do the best thing. You're right sizing the situation for them. You're helping them understand it. And you're saying to them, if that happens again, if you're ever disappointed in a gift and you react the way grandma expects you to, you say, thank you so much, I really appreciate it, and you come to me later, I will buy you the gift that you were hoping for, or I will contribute
Yeah.
some money towards it, right?
Right.
Or I will
Right.
give you a different treat. We'll stop off on the way home for ice cream because I will help you, right? I will give you
Yeah.
something else to look forward to, right?
Yeah.
That does not harm attachment. That teaches the child, right?
Right.
You're responsive. I get it.
Yeah.
Totally get it, right? You're not like, you rude, harsh, terrible child. How could you say that to grandma? You're not doing that. You're like, yeah, I get it. You
Right.
were so disappointed. And grandma's human too. Grandma
Yep.
has feelings. How do you think she felt?
Yep.
It's a both and. That's really, for me, what boils down what is good parenting.
Mhm.
It's being responsive and responsible. And then I have very strong feelings about playing with kids and reading to kids, that those are two parenting practices that we need to integrate in as much as we can. Because if you really want to build that, the building block of attachment is something called attunement, where
Mhm.
you and I together are sharing a space and we're joining together and we're, having that dance of attachment with each other. And the way you do that is either through play or through a shared fantasy like reading together.
Right. Right. Yeah. It builds their social emotional skills. It builds, again, that attachment and that connection between you. Yeah, I'm a
Yeah.
huge fan of reading to and with kids.
Yeah.
It's harder for me to play. I'm probably not the most playful person in our home. I have different ways of playing with my kids than, say, my husband had, but
Right.
I've been learning on the journey that it's not that I'm not able to play, it's that I play differently.
Yeah. And also you have to expand your definition of play,
Yeah.
right? Crocheting
Yeah.
together might be play. Going on a
Right.
walk together might be play. Gardening together might be play. Cooking
Yeah.
together might be play. Different,
Yeah.
different kids, different neurologies of kids.
Right.
And then also
Right.
yourself. I'm also not like, playing with kids is sometimes what I do for a job. So sometimes I'm a little burnt out from playing with kids,
I'll
right, in
bet.
the evening. But I love to go on like what we call schmoozing walks with my kids. I love cooking in the kitchen, like with one of my
Mhm.
kids who like that. For us, that's play.
Yeah.
It's about a activity that you approach with joy that you do together or
Yeah.
side by
Yeah.
side or face to face. That's the attunement. It doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily
Yeah.
have to be like we're
Yeah.
sitting down and doing Candyland, right?
Yeah.
It's just different.
No. Board games are the bane of my existence. We do kitchen dance parties. You get the
Right.
soundtrack from any of the Trolls movies going, and it's time to dance
Yeah.
in the kitchen.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's play, right?
Yep. Yep.
It's about understanding what is play. And
Yeah.
then again, that dance of attunement. Because like you were saying before, I look at, foster care or any sort of, parenting any sort of traumatized child, a little bit like being in the parenting Olympics, right? Like anybody can play in like the neighborhood league, right? But it
Right.
takes a really skillful person to be in the Olympics. So you have to put a lot of skill into the parenting Olympics, right?
Yep.
And sometimes that means also understanding what is skillful, because a kitchen dance party on a random Tuesday night is very, very, very skillful. Even if some influencer is like, nope, 25 minutes of Candyland, or you're just not doing it right.
Oh, I love your repeated emphasis in the book on the value of routines and rituals like playing with your kids or reading with your kids. How can parents balance that sense of routine, because it is so important for our kids to have that consistency and to know what's coming next and to be able to predict what their environment will hold for them when they get home from school. I know that this is what's going to happen, without feeling like you're kind of being oppressed by that routine, or it's just a big bunch of rules and rigidity.
So you have to know, I think, what your neurology needs, because, parents are people too. And you have to, some people really need predictability and routine and just the sense of like knowing what to expect. And some people feel very, very hemmed in by it. So it's
Mhm.
about knowing yourself and knowing what you can tolerate and what you can't tolerate. And it's
Yeah.
also about knowing your kids. Routine is so much more necessary when they're toddlers and when they're small than we realize. And a lot of parents who grew up in chaos don't realize how just like I can very often troubleshoot a good 75% of like dysregulation in toddlers just by instituting a routine in the home.
Yeah.
And once you see the routine as, oh, wow, now we don't have meltdowns at dinner because we moved
Yeah.
dinner up
Yeah.
a half hour and it's always happening at the same time. And it's better to have peanut butter and jelly sandwiches at 4:30 than roast chicken at 7 p.m. when the kid's really ready for bed then.
Right.
And we've suddenly we fix it and it doesn't feel so much like a prison. But as they get older, we can break routine. And as they get older, we can say oh, we can change this. We needed this framework when they were young. We don't need it as much anymore. But very often when kids are toddlers, parents who didn't grow up with routines themselves don't realize just how much little ones really need the predictability. It makes them feel extremely, extremely safe. So you can feel hemmed in by it until you realize oh, it's actually freeing me up because I don't spend all night in angst about how I handled 15 million meltdowns because there weren't 15 million meltdowns. Right.
It's similar to the conversation about the sticker charts. If you can use it as a tool to accomplish your goals, then it's a fantastic tool. When it becomes something that's blocking you from your bigger goals of healthy attachment or, smooth running evening together as a family, then you need to reevaluate and reassess.
Right. And usually it's because it's for the little things like developing a habit of brushing your teeth or putting your bike away or hanging up your coat when you come in. You don't use a sticker chart for, something that's much larger than that because then it can end up becoming coercive and the prizes get big and it just becomes this whole mess. It's more about okay, you hang up your coat, you put a sticker on your chart, and then next thing you know, it becomes second nature for the child to hang up their coat and then we move on to something else. Yeah. That's not going to harm attachment. That's just going to be this is what we expect to happen. Yeah. Right. And then when those routines exist, you don't have to have constant battles about situations. A lot of times with the littler kids, we always talk about control the environment, not the child. And it's so much easier the more you can control the environment. If you don't want your kid to use their screens at night in their room, don't have screens in their bedrooms. It's very often as simple as that. Phones need to be charging overnight in the kitchen, powered off. Simple things where you institute it. There's some grumbles for a little while, but then it's not a daily battle every night at 11:30. You got to log off. Why are you still on TikTok? You have to log off. Why are you still on this? Why are you still on that? Because it's off. Yeah. There's no Wi-Fi in our home after this hour. End of story. Right. Yeah. And sometimes then a whole host of other problems don't happen.
Right. Yeah, that external routine or schedule becomes an internal rhythm. Yeah. And that's really what we want for ourselves, but it's also what we want for our kids.
Yeah. My own, now adult children will talk about I was frustrated about not having a phone when I was in high school, but boy, now that I, do have a phone all the time, boy, am I glad that I didn't have a phone in high school, Right. You'll thank me later. If it's done in a way that's consistent yourself, you're also doing, and that's also you're explaining why and you're empathizing. I totally get it. Yeah. Feel like you're left out of the loop. Your friends are still on this grade WhatsApp chat and you've logged off. Something might happen.
Right.
You're right. I feel really bad about that and maybe I can make it up to you in this other way. And we're not having a phone in our bedroom overnight.
Yep. That consistency. Well, I so appreciate that this kind of shift in mindset is accessible and it's not just a challenge. It's kind of also the relief that we talked about at the beginning of the interview. There is so much more, listeners, in this book that we did not even get to capture today in this interview. 1 hour of conversation is nowhere near enough to cover everything that you'll find is beneficial from this book. So I highly encourage you to check it out. It's called Post-Traumatic Parenting: Break the Cycle and Become the Parent You Always Wanted to Be. Dr. Koslowitz, thank you for your time. Thank you for introducing us to these mind shifts and these reframes. We appreciate your time and your expertise, and we wish you well with the selling of the book.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I really appreciate the mission that you're doing. It can feel so, like I said, when you're in the parenting Olympics, it can feel really isolating and really hard, but the really valuable things come from the really hard things. So I'm just blown away by what you guys do.
Oh, thank you so much. We appreciate it. And I'll share that with the rest of our team as well. Thank you.